We could see Putin testing the resolve of NATO by making a modest incursion into Estonia or Lithuania or Latvia, just testing this Article 5 business. Is an attack on one really going to be met by a response from all? Would America be prepared to go into some form of conflict for Estonia? It's an interesting question.
The new head of MI6, Blaise Metrovelli, will use her first speech to warn of the growing threat from Russia, calling for more spies to deal with increasingly complex security threats. Speaking at the HQ of Britain's Foreign Intelligence Service later today, she's expected to say the front line is everywhere and confirm the pressure applied on Ukraine's behalf will be sustained. It comes as the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, is in Berlin with other European leaders to support Volodymyr Zelensky on day 2 of his peace negotiations with the US. Well, with me now is Lord Dannat, Richard Dannat, the former head of the British Army. Lord Dannat, hello, welcome to Times Radio.
Thank you very much. It's very good to join you. Thank you.
Good to have you with us. But we're expecting, what response from the expected warning? What response from the expected? What is your response to this warning by the MI6's new head? Is this what you're expecting? Is this a new outspoken tone from MI6?
Well, I think what she's doing is echoing what quite a lot of commentators have been saying for quite some time. Mark Rutte, at the end of last week, very forcibly warned about the dangers from Russia and the fact that it was time for European leaders just to stop talking the talk, but actually start to walk it with more money. And of course, those countries that are closest to Russia and have common borders with Russia have stepped up to the plate already. But countries like ourselves, who feel a little bit more distant, are being much slower to increase our defence spending and therefore increase our capability to deter further aggression from Russia. So these voices from the new head of MI6, from the Chief of the Defence Staff, I think he's speaking at RUSI later on today, and letters that were in the Times newspaper over the weekend, are all saying the same thing, that these threats are real, these threats are present, and that we frankly got to face up to them and start to get realistic about it and find more money for our national security.
How significant is Volodymyr Zelensky's remarks that he might be willing to concede the ambition of NATO membership? How much difference does that make to our commitment to Ukraine?
Well, I think it's an interesting one there, because if he is serious about giving up his ambition to join NATO, what he won't be willing to do is to water down bilateral security ties that countries like ourselves and France and Germany and Poland might be willing to agree with Ukraine. And of course, there is a bit of a danger here, even for us, because if Ukraine was to become a member of NATO and Russia was to attack Ukraine again, then under Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty, an attack on one member is an attack on all, and therefore an attack on Ukraine would be an attack on all other NATO member states. But if there is not going to be NATO membership for Ukraine and just a series of bilateral arrangements, well, we're kind of in a position we were in 1939, 1940, where we had given a security guarantee to Poland. Germany attacked Poland. We declared war on Germany, didn't do much about it, and the Germans captured Poland. So we are in an interesting situation if NATO membership is on the table and taken off it as far as the Ukraine is concerned.
How prepared are we for that idea of conflict with Russia itself, whatever form that conflict should take?
Well, whatever form that conflict should take is a very interesting discussion in its own right. And many would say we are already in that conflict of a hybrid nature, if we just look at the various things that have been happening in recent times. The Russian ships examining our undersea cabling, Russian citizens being poisoned in this country, mysterious drone attacks. A lot of these things are already happening. I think what we will see, what we may see, and if the Russians perceive that we in the West are not taking our own security seriously enough, we could see, after a ceasefire in Ukraine, a resumption of a war there, or we could see Putin testing the resolve of NATO by making a modest incursion into Estonia or Lithuania or Latvia, just testing this Article 5 business. Is an attack on one really going to be met by a response from all? Would America be prepared to go into some form of conflict for Estonia? It's an interesting question, and these are important questions that have got to be grappled with. But the way to deter this kind of adventurism is, I'm afraid, and I sound like a broken record, is reprioritizing our government spending. putting more money into defence to increase our armed forces capability and therefore to deter adventurism from Vladimir Putin's Russia.
Thank you very much indeed, Lord Dannat, former head of the British Army. Good to speak to you, as always.
What we have to keep in mind is that why countries want to be in NATO is because they don't want Russia to invade them, to attack them. And that's why, Sweden and Finland joined NATO. That's why the Baltic states joined NATO, to have this defense umbrella, really. We have to understand that Donbas is not Putin's endgame. If it gets Donbas, then the fortress is down, and then they definitely move on with taking the whole of Ukraine. And if Ukraine goes, then other regions are also in danger. We know this from the history, and we should learn from history.
What do you?
Yes, like I said, this is really a very important week for financing questions. We have different options on the table, and they will be discussed in the leaders' meeting on Thursday. What President Costa has said, we will not leave the meeting before we get the result, before we get the decision on the funding for Ukraine. The most credible option is the reparations loan, and this is what we are working on. We are not there yet, and it is increasingly difficult, but we're doing the work. We still have some days.
This FAC meeting is really important for Lithuania, as we expect that colleagues ministers will agree and the Council will pass the additional criteria for the Belarusian sanctions regime. We're adding 3 points additionally to the current sanctions regime related to the hybrid activities against the European Union. I'm really looking forward into expanding the sanctions regime on Belarus if those hybrid activities continue against us. So politically united and then also fast in the decisions. This is the recipe for the future and prevention from the activities against the EU as we were suffering already. Only when we are united, dictators step back.